is failing because the confidence of the traveling public has been lost due to this act of war. We need to make sure that when the confidence returns, that there are airlines here with the capacity to get the economy moving. Air transportation has, run the economies of the world for 200 years, and it's today air transportation runs this engine.
Well, let's look at that question of what works. Let me start with you, Mr. Mullen, and then Mr. Bethune. Why don't you jump in as well? What other security measures are now needed?
Well, I think that the steps that are being taken, both with respect to the addition of sky marshals and additional law enforcement officers at every step of the way, our own attempts to eliminate, say, curbside baggage, that all baggage has to be checked at the counter and the like, all of these are steps that are going to be very helpful.
Excuse me, you say addition of sky marshals, but are you willing to accept armed marshals on every plane, every flight?
I certainly would be.
Absolutely.
And for a time. I think that we have to work very closely with the government to do whatever it takes in a law enforcement way to ensure that the American public has complete confidence in aviation.
George, looking at the load factors, there's certainly going to be seats available for them.
Mr. Bethune, let me ask you about another possible measure being considered. All Airlines now locks its pilots in the cockpit for the duration of their flights. Is that a good idea?
Well, I think it is an idea that deserves some scrutiny. There for some accommodation for our pilots, but quite frankly, this is the first time where terrorists have taken over the control of the airplane and not use it to make a political statement, but actually to use it as a bomb. So we need to deny them the guidance of that vehicle, which is used for peaceful commerce, and that may be an issue that needs to be more closely looked at.
Sam raised in his interview with Senator Clinton the possibility of passenger profiling. Mr. Mullen, what do you think about that idea?
Well, there is a program called CAP, computer-assisted profiling, that has actually been used for a time. I think I also heard Attorney General Ashcroft talk about some of the attributes which I think from the American way of life I would never want to see introduced into that, having to do with such issues as racial profiling, which is inconsistent with the American way. But these computer-assisted profiles look at various aspects of just travel habits that can give an indication as to whether or not a passenger might be operating in an aberrant way. And I do think that we do need to use all of the techniques that are at our disposal in order to deal with the magnitude of the crisis that we do face. And we are using every method to ensure the American public that we are going to be very safe as aviation reaches its full potential.
So it's okay to look at travel patterns, but not ethnicity or race?
Well, I think... Oh, I'm sorry, Leo, you go ahead.
I would say from my standpoint, he was asked a specific question of race, and I do not think that's appropriate to be included in that. There are some nationalistic questions. Obviously, there are some countries that are somewhat more threatening to America than others, and so those considerations come into play, but not race as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Bethune, you wanted to get in here.
Well, I agree with Leo. Obviously, he said take race off the table, but leave everything else on the table, and I think that's what's being done, and I think that's appropriate.
Another issue that's come up in all this is the training and the pay of security personnel. These are low-paid people. They're not necessarily go through very rigorous training. What more can we do on that end?
One idea that's been talked about is to nationalize this and make it a national service. Certainly, we would welcome such an attempt to increase the security and have it uniform throughout the United States.
So actually make these a kind of U.S. Marshals?
Well, I mean, you could name it what you wanted to, but it would be a part of our government's responsibility to ensure the safety of the citizens. Right now, it's the responsibility of the airlines, and it could be enhanced and I think, broadened.
That's going to take an act of Congress, Mr. Mullen. Can you get it?
I think we could get it. I think that there's going to be a major discussion going on that very subject. In the European countries, the security measures are the responsibility of the governments, and I favor, and I believe most of my colleagues in the industry favor, the government taking over all of this. I think, and it isn't just a cost situation at all. I mean, at some point somebody has to pay for it in some way. It has to do with giving the confidence to the public that we have a safe and secure aviation system. And I think that the American public generally does have confidence in the security that is provided by our governmental operations.
ABC's Betsy Stark reported last night that some of the restrictions include, for example, not allowing the shipment of electronic materials in the bellies of passenger aircraft. Mr. Bethune, what is that going to mean for the health of the airline industry, those kinds of restrictions?
I think those are arbitrary and ones that are not well thought out. Our problems aren't today the integrity of the cargo system. As you see from this week's events, it had nothing to do with checked bags or any of those issues. You, as I think was the Secretary of Defense mentioned earlier in the show, can't anticipate where it's going to come next. We need to be able to have commerce in this city, in this country, and people ship routinely their needs on our airplanes, and I don't think we should just unilaterally dismiss a whole part of commerce.
So, Mr. Mullen, just so I can be clear on that, I'm not sure if you agree with Mr. Bethune, but you both support the increased security measures on passengers, but are concerned about those on cargo. Is that true for you as well, Mr. Mullen?
I think that the entire gamut of security measures that have been taken are appropriate, including those on cargo, to perhaps give a nuance in what Gordon was suggesting. I think that over the next few weeks, we're going to have to adjust those as we go along. Remember that in one day, really on Wednesday, we have reinvented the entire security apparatus of aviation. It was an incredible effort by the government and the industry through intensive discussions in which both Gordon and I were involved intensively during that day and a half to do this. And to anticipate that we got it exactly right on the first try would be unrealistic. So I think we'll see some adjustments, and I certainly share what Gordon has just said, is we have to make those necessary adjustments to keep commerce in this country moving and to really get the engine of our economic life going again. And everybody knows how absolutely essential aviation is to that. And I'm confident that through a joint effort with the government and the airlines, we're going to do that.
I just have one final question for both of you. There's a report this morning from government officials saying that National Airport is going to be closed for a long time, and some have suggested that it may never open at all. What is that going to mean for the airline industry, and how are you going to cope with that? Mr. Bethune, you first, and then Mr. Mullen.
Well, I support whatever the government decides on that. This is a national security issue, and if they, in their wisdom, say that that's not appropriate, then we can support that. We'll put the service into Dulles, into BWI, and take the longer ride into town. We definitely want to support our government and all it needs to make our citizens secure. At the same time, we want to be there for them when this is over so that we can have an economy that we can all be employed.
Mr. Mullen?
I think that what I have heard, George, is heightened security measures, different traveling patterns coming in on the airplanes into national. It is absolutely necessary to do that given the magnitude of this crisis. I would be very, very surprised if Reagan National did not reopen. But I also share Gordon's view. We can handle it out of Dulles or Baltimore if we have to, and people have their way of getting into Washington.
All right, gentlemen, thanks very much.
Thanks, George.
Thank you, George.
And joining us now for more on the economy is Robert Hormats with Goldman Sachs International. Let's go straight to the impact of the airline industry on the overall economy. Both Mr. Bethune and Mr. Mullen talked about ripple effects. What are they?
Well, they're enormous because transportation in this country has been disrupted for people and for goods, as you've pointed out. That's one major factor in an otherwise over weakening economy. The economy has been weak. It's going to get weaker. The disruption in transportation is one part of it. The other is that the American consumer has become much more reluctant to spend. Traditionally, in these circumstances, the consumer sort of hunkers down and feels a lack of confidence in the future and therefore cuts back on spending. Those things together and a number of others will weaken the economic outlook going forward.
Vice President Cheney said this morning that the economy isn't only weak, but it quite possibly could be in a recession.
That's certainly possible. We could have a couple of negative quarters, as he's indicated. The more important thing down the road really is how we as a country and how we as a government respond. As a country, the quicker we can get back to more normal patterns of living, the better it will be for confidence in ourselves and also for the economy. And also the government. The government's very important. The Federal Reserve is going to create more liquidity. That's going to be important. The lockbox on the Social Security surplus is wide open. We're going to spend as much money as we need for security to rebuild New York, perhaps to help the airlines industry.
Because we may be meeting both exceptions now, both war and, as you say, possibly recession.
Absolutely. We have war and possibly a recession, and therefore a more relaxed, a more stimulative fiscal policy, maybe new tax cuts, but certainly a lot more spending can give the economy a very important boost. That will be very helpful. But how the consumer responds, does the consumer become more confident about the future, go back to business, as Mayor Giuliani has pointed out for New Yorkers, get back into the swing of things, that will be very helpful too.
Well, the markets are going to try to set an example tomorrow. They say the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange is going to ring at 9:30 tomorrow morning. What has the Stock Exchange told your firms about how they expect the markets to run tomorrow?
Well, everything has been worked out on for the last couple of days, and I think our firm and others feel confident that they can deal with these issues and move ahead. And there's a lot of confidence in the future that the stock exchange will work, the markets will work, and the firms that are operating will be able to work quite effectively.
But there are probably at least 4 separate issues that Richard Grasso, the head of the stock exchange, has said we have to look at. The security of the buildings, whether or not telephones and computers work, whether or not the environment down there is healthy, and then these various quality of life issues, food, water, transportation. When you look at those range of issues, which are you most worried about?
Well, I think that the security of the apparatus, the communications and the computers has been tested. I think one of the interesting things that for all of us is that the financial community is a competitive community, but it's also a community where there are a lot of friends and a lot of close relationships. And many of our friends are lost. And that psychological impact is going to be enormous. We're in mourning for them, as well as for the firefighters, the policemen and women, the EMS people who tried to save their lives. And even ringing the bell, while we may be able to operate the market effectively, there's going to be a psychological set of concerns that's going to linger for some period of time.
I can't imagine what it's going to be like for all of you to go to work down there tomorrow when you're dealing with the loss of friends and colleagues. Let's look at what you expect to happen tomorrow. What do you think will happen when the markets open at 9:30? What's going to, up or down?
It's very hard to predict the stock market on any given day. One thing that has worked perhaps to our advantage is that the market has been closed for the last 4 days, and that has given time, I think, for people to assess the situation. Probably will mean less of a chance of panic selling than we would have had the market opened up on Tuesday or Wednesday. But that, I think, is going to be one of the factors that's a plus, that we will have perhaps a little bit more stability. But traditionally, in these circumstances, in the past, the market has tended to go down on the first couple of days when it's open and then stabilize and perhaps move up. And I think that's going to be an important factor going forward.
But if you look at the clues from the foreign markets, they were pretty steady early in the week. And then when the rhetoric of war kind of ratcheted up starting on Friday from President Bush, they dropped.
Yes, they did. The European markets dropped out, although the Asian ones did fairly well. I think we're in for a period of considerable volatility because there is still that uncertainty. What's the extent of the war? How much is it going to cost? How many casualties? What effect will it have on the energy supplies? If this is going to be in the Middle East or areas close to the Middle East, the Islamic world, there's always a risk of disruption of energy supplies through direct action, through terrorism, or through governments in the Middle East becoming weaker because of support for the United States. All these potential threats to energy will play a role in the way the market looks at the future. And we're also going to have what I can call a terrorism tax going down the road. We're going to have to spend more for our security of airplanes, security of buildings, security of facilities, internet security, financial security. This is going to have a long-term weight on the economy. The market will have to take that into consideration as well.
So given all that, what advice are you giving your clients?
I think clients have to just be very careful when they go into the market. There are going to be some areas, sectors of the economy that are going to be adversely affected, and perhaps some where people will see investment opportunities because stocks have fallen too low or they see good future prospects. It's going to be a mixed market, and you have to select stocks very carefully. I wouldn't advise anyone to jump in, but I wouldn't advise anyone to panic and sell immediately either, because I think the government is, through the Fed and through fiscal policy and through cooperation with other countries, trying to respond in a constructive way. And I think the American people are going to dig down deep into their traditional optimism and try to return to normalcy as quickly as we can, and that will help as well.
When you speak about that, do you in the banking world feel any kind of patriotic responsibility to prop the markets up? There have been some reports that the banks have agreed, perhaps informally, to get in and buy if the market goes in a free fall.
I think we feel a patriotic responsibility to support the U.S. government in what it's trying to do to bring the economy and bring the country back to normalcy. Not so much to prop up the market per se, but to be as honest as we can to our clients and to the viewing public, to people who listen to what we say about the economy and about the future, and discourage panic selling. I think that's one of the things we can do. We can also point out that there are enormous strengths in this country and this economy. We've built up our economic institutions over the past 200 years. They're strong. The Treasury is strong, the Federal Reserve, our financial system, our capital markets are strong. One of the reasons for being able to open the stock market relatively soon, even though it wasn't able to open right away, is to demonstrate that these terrorists who struck a blow at the heart of the American capitalist system are not going to succeed in